Give me my theme music.
As you guys probably already know, Tulsi Gabbard was born into a religious organization that experts have long dubbed a cult called the Science Identity Foundation, or SIF. SIF was founded in the late 70s by a man named Chris Butler, who refers to himself as like a guru. And Chris Butler believes that he is a mouthpiece of God and has spiritual authority over people on earth. Chris Butler has really based a lot of his theories from the Hindu religion, but this is not just like a group of people who are all of the same faith who are trying to lead a holy life. In fact, I think conflating the SIF and Hinduism is offensive. There's just like some very strange things that go on within this group. For example, members of this group are required to bow down to Chris Butler. His followers eat the scraps off of his plate. As Chris Butler is so holy, it is a gift to them. Ex-members of the SIF have even talked about ceremonies in which Chris Butler would clip his fingernails and toenails, give them to his congregation, and they were required to boil them and make tea out of them to grow closer to Chris Butler's divinity. The SIF rejects any kind of public or mainstream education and demands that any members of the SIF homeschool their children, which explains why Tulsi Gabbard's parents opted to homeschool her. The foundation also heavily believes in the spiritual realm. And when I say they believe in the spiritual realm, they believe that anyone who does not think the way they do or engage in certain behaviors are demonic. Chris Butler teaches his sect that Muslims, for example, are all inherently evil and worship the devil. He also teaches that people who are a part of the LGBTQ community are demonic. And for some reason, he also specifically believes that the B members of the LGBTQ community are not only demonic, but they also engage in acts with children and animals. And this is what he teaches his congregation as fact, not opinion. And this ideology is placed onto the children of the foundation at a very young age. Instead of going to school, children would be required to sit and listen to either Chris Butler himself or audio recordings of Chris Butler teaching. And many of the lessons centered around how evil the LGBTQ community was. And in his teachings, he would only refer to them as the F slur and the D slur. Ex-members have said that they had to listen to some very, very graphic information in those teachings at a very young age. Before we go any further, I want to show you guys some clips of this man talking, just to get your guys' gauge on it. First video I'm going to show you is of Chris Butler doing kind of like a teaching with all his like people gathered around him. And in this specific video, he's kind of poking fun at some of the beliefs that Christians hold. You will very clearly see Tulsi Gabbard's parents listening to Chris Butler attentively and laughing at his jokes.
Supposedly we're made in the image of God. But we all got faces. But God ain't got a face, okay? Now, if that ain't scary, man, that ain't, whoa. Can you imagine that? I mean, if you came, you know, you went to meet someone, went door to door, you know, maybe you're selling soap or selling newspapers or whatever, you knock on the door, you know, and the guy opens the door, no face. Whoa! I'm getting out of here!
Scientists have recently discovered, quite a few people don't have any brains. Cranium is actually filled with spinal fluid. And these people have very good grades in school and, you know, straight A students in college, some of them.
Even if you haven't taken drugs, you're just waiting. It's just a matter of time before you do.
So as you can see, he's pretty out there. This is not a traditional Hindu leader by any means. Chris Butler has implemented a lot of different ritualistic elements and rules into his cult that he expects his members to abide by. They are required to intensively practice yoga multiple times a day. They are expected to be vegetarian. They are required to bow to Chris Butler.
It's a cult of personality. It's 100% total domination by Chris Butler. His will must be followed, and it's zero critical thinking. Like, you cannot think about it at all. The group will turn on you if you even raise one question. It creates the most disempowered mentality in the members of the cult. They cannot think for themselves, and they obey Chris Butler no matter what he says. They give him all their money. They cut off their own kids for him. They make their kids worship this old, crazy sociopath.
They can be required to engage in sleep deprivation and food deprivation in order to deepen their reverence towards Chris Butler. If someone in the group is to upset him or not listen to one of his commands, they will be publicly shamed. And all that is what Tulsi Gabbard was raised in and has continued to practice in her adult life. Even today, Tulsi Gabbard has stated that Chris Butler is a spiritual guide and guru to her and was especially foundational in her youth. Ex-members have stated that they are to look at Chris Butler as God, and to question Chris Butler is to question God. Today, Tulsi Gabbard claims to be a part of the Hindu faith base, and I'm not saying she's not, but I'm also saying that many members who are a part of this group will tell people who are not in this group that they practice Hinduism.
Whether we know him as Krishna or by one of his countless other names, he is the origin of each and every one of us. He is the Supreme Father, our best friend. He is our source and our refuge. I belong to Krishna. I, the spirit soul, can be truly happy and content by giving Krishna my heart, by embracing him with my love. Each and every one of us can give Krishna our heart. He is waiting for each of us to say, "Dear Krishna, my life is yours."
Again, while there are elements of Hinduism used within this cult, I think it's pretty clear that Chris Butler has hijacked this religion and tried to use it to glorify himself. So here's a more recent photo of Chris Butler. Back in 2017, Chris Butler spoke with a reporter from the New Yorker who was doing a piece on Tulsi Gabbard, and that reporter kind of wanted to know what his relationship with Tulsi Gabbard was like and how involved with this group that she truly was. Chris Butler explained to this reporter that Tulsi Gabbard was one of his star pupils. He also went on to say that training Tulsi spiritually was like training a cellist who would one day perform in a Philharmonic orchestra. Tulsi Gabbard has never denounced her affiliation with this cult publicly, and she is still very close with her family, who is openly intertwined within this cult. And it is well known and communicated by ex-members that if you are to leave this religious practice, you are excommunicated. You are cut off from your family and friends who stay in. We know that Tulsi Gabbard is still very much a spiritual person, talks about her faith a lot, talks about the Hindu faith, yoga, all of these things very often, and is very close with her family members, which leads us to assume that she has not denounced this cult because she has not been excommunicated by her family. And of course, that's just my assumption and my opinion. Tulsi's father, Senator Mike Gabbard, is actually the headmaster of an SIF boarding school, and Tulsi's mother also worked at this boarding school, and members of the SIF will send their children to these boarding schools when they become teenagers so that they can really connect with the teachings of Chris Butler in a very highly controlled setting at a time when teenagers naturally rebel. Mike Gabbard has also been so inspired by the teachings of Chris Butler. He even had a radio program for a while that denounced the LGBTQ community and promoted being straight.
Each of us has the right to marry, but we don't have the absolute right to marry anyone we want. For example, I'm not allowed to marry my daughter or my son.
I can't marry my sister or my brother.
And I can't marry Kilo. And I can't marry my dog. This doesn't mean we don't have civil rights. Don't open the door to weird marriages. Don't let homosexuals force their values on the people of Hawaii.
Honestly, it's a crazy rabbit hole, the connections between the Gabbard family and Chris Butler. Someone on X made a graph of all of the connections between Chris Butler and the Gabbard family, and it is very alarming how intertwined they all still are. And like, this is our director of Homeland Security. There were even allegations at one point levied against the Gabbard family that both Senator Mike Gabbard and at the time State Rep Tulsi Gabbard were assisting Chris Butler in covering up money laundering by exploiting their authority in their elected positions. And there's also a grocery chain within Hawaii called Down to Earth that is owned by the SIF. And typically, not always, cult members are hired to work in that grocery store because they can work for hours on end and all of their earnings go back to Chris Butler. But that's a whole other rabbit hole that just gets really messy. So we'll just leave that there for now. Obviously, we can't say for a fact that Tulsi Gabbard is still involved in this cult, but what's really interesting to me is, remember, up until 2020, Tulsi Gabbard was a Democrat, and she chose to leave the Democratic Party due to people being hostile when it came to her faith. likely translating to Tulsi Gabbard did not like when people were digging into the connections to this cult as she was stepping into a position of public service. And let me just be clear, I don't think there's anything wrong with government officials or elected officials openly practicing a religion. Whether you're religious or not, it should not affect your ability to do the best by the people who elected you. And it shouldn't matter whether you're religious or not, you should be able to always lead with empathy, integrity, and transparency. But if your religious beliefs are going to hinder you from doing that job, you should not be in any kind of a position of authority in government at all. I personally believe that when religious beliefs get turned into policy, it's not only dangerous, but it's un-American. I also think that if Tulsi Gabbard hasn't done the work to deconstruct from this cult, the cult-like setting of this administration of loyalists would be a very comfortable place for her to be in, and she becomes a figure who is easily malleable, which is exactly what the administration needs. Let me just be super clear, like, this is not to be shady at all to anyone who practices the Hindu faith whatsoever. I don't think what is being practiced in this cult is Hinduism. I think it's a bastardization of a sacred religion. I don't know what's really tea, but I think this is very interesting. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I don't know about y'all, but I'm kind of getting like Yellow Deli vibes.
3 days later.
Okay, I'm still stuck in this Tulsi Gabbard rabbit hole. So let's talk a little bit more about this religious organization that she grew up in, and I personally believe she is still very involved with today. First thing I want to do is talk about the differences, the key differences between like mainstream Hinduism and what is being practiced at Chris Butler's Science of Identity Foundation, so that you can better understand how much Chris Butler and his followers have perverted this religion. Please, anyone who does practice Hinduism, feel free to correct me or elaborate on anything. I'm trying to keep it just very brief and basic so that we can understand the drastic differences in these two belief systems at their core. So in mainstream Hinduism, you would just pray directly to your supreme God, but in the SIF, you pray and worship Chris Butler, who is then supposed to transcend that worship to Krishna. They have a similarity in the fact that the use of idols or idolatry is a very common thing to see within Hinduism, but in the SIF, Chris Butler is added as a figure worthy of worship next to the supreme God. This is a gathering being done by the SIF, and as you can see, there's members of the church who are bowing down and praying to Chris Butler, who is next to their supreme God. In Hinduism, a guru is someone who would guide people who are of the same Hindu faith towards worshiping Krishna. Gurus are not worshipped as if they are divine, but Chris Butler and his congregation view him as divine and worship him, give him offerings, bow to him, bow to his altars, eat the scraps off of his plate so that they can become more divine themselves. As you can see, it's a very big difference. Hinduism will often refer to the Bhagavad Gita or other holy text as like their scripture, but in the SIF, Chris Butler's teachings will always dominate. The only time Chris Butler will invoke those texts is if he can cherry pick them to help prove why he is correct. People who practice mainstream Hinduism typically go to temples that are publicly accessible to anyone, while the SIF is a completely closed off group, very secretive and engage in a lot of isolation, which is not congruent with mainstream Hinduism. Mainstream Hinduism welcomes the idea of interpretation and philosophical debate, while the SIF sees any kind of questioning or pushback from its congregation as betrayal and will typically end up with that member being shunned from not only the group, but from the rest of their family that stays in the group. Mainstream Hinduism embraces spiritual freedom and balance, while Chris Butler and the SIF control every bit of their members' day-to-day lives. From what they can eat, to when they can eat, to when they can sleep, to what they can think about, whom they can marry, to whom they can date, to where they can work. And people who practice Hinduism are everywhere. They're very integrated within society, while in the SIF, things are very much more secretive, and the SIF encourages its members to not identify that they are a part of this group to the public. I could keep going, but that's like the basic differences that make what the SIF is doing very different and like a perverted version of Hinduism. Like I said yesterday, I don't personally believe that Tulsi Gabbard is out of this religious organization by any means. I still believe that she still views Chris Butler as like her deity, her supreme god. We know for a fact that people who do leave the SIF are shunned by their family members. And we do know for a fact that Tulsi Gabbard's parents and some of her siblings are still in the SIF and are still very close to her. She's never been shunned. I won't show this right now, but I also did find all of Tulsi Gabbard's siblings and parents' social medias and did a little bit of digging. And it's very clear that they are still very much involved within the SIF. One of the reasons that I say that is because when you go to any of their following lists on their social medias, they are all following members of the SIF. And for me, this explains so much about why Tulsi Gabbard is the way that she is. And that's not me giving her grace, because yes, I understand she is a full-grown adult and she is doing the harm that she is doing as an autonomous being. But for her whole life, Tulsi Gabbard's been nothing more than a vessel to complete some man's agenda. She cozies up around dictators because she grew up worshiping one. She believes in the existence of spiritual dictators and the validity of spiritual dictators. And I don't think she bats an eye when she meets with and does business with Modi or Bashar al-Assad, because she thinks the actions that they did were justified, because dictatorship is a valid thing in Tulsi Gabbard's existence. And someone commented yesterday in one of the videos and was saying how, like, when you look at her, there's just like nothing there. It's 100% true. For example, when you look at like Stephen Miller, you can see the seething anger behind his eyes. When you look at Tulsi Gabbard, she is a shell of a human being. For her whole life, all she has done is fulfill agendas. Between growing up in a cult, then going into the service for the United States, working in Congress, now sitting in one of the most important intelligence positions in the United States, she's always just been a vessel for an agenda. But don't be fooled, that does not make her a benevolent force. She is still doing very evil things on her own accord. That's all I have for right now, but I am sure I will have more to say about this very soon.